Thank you, Carl. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Second Unitarian Church. I am Barbara Michael. I am a member of the Board of Trustees, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Today, we are in person at the Admiral at the Lake, the 2U Sanctuary, and continuing to meet virtually using Zoom. We ask everyone's indulgence for the complications of a three-part service, and we're glad you are here whichever way you are attending. If you are in the sanctuary and would benefit from hearing assistance, we have devices available. Please see our tech team in the back. We are currently seeing both a national and global surge in COVID numbers again. We encourage people to wear masks during the service. The practice prevents transmission of the virus and helps us center the needs of those who are most vulnerable. We especially welcome newcomers and visitors this morning. Finding a new community and making new connections can be challenging. Please note and know that we are excited to have you and look forward to getting to know you. If you're new to us today, please note that in the Zoom chat, if you're on Zoom, or mention it in person during conversation after the service. If you would like, there are blue mugs that you can use to signal to others that you would like them to come up and say hello. We also always need people in the kitchen after coffee hour, and that's a great place to see old friends and make new ones. Our worship today is led by Reverend Hannah Villnave, along with John Broom as worship associate. Music is provided by the 2U Family Choir and Director of Music Carl Kennedy. Our time together requires a large group of people who make possible the worship, the music, the technical production. They are listed in the order of service, and we thank them for their ongoing service to our congregation. I have a couple of announcements this morning. Following the service today, we have two things going on. First, the membership committee is hosting the second of 3 sessions for new members downstairs in Fleischman Fellowship Hall. If you have attended at least 3 services and are interested in becoming a member, this is the space for you. Additionally, the young adult group, for those ages 18 to 35, will gather in the sanctuary following coffee hour. This time for spiritual reflection will be led by Rylan. Please get your coffee and come right back here to the sanctuary. Next Sunday, following the service, the sanctuary will be transformed into a space for workshopping together. So we won't be in rows, we'll probably be around tables. And that's to kick off our annual Canvas campaign. During this workshop, the Stewardship Ministry, along with Reverend Jason, will lead us through a discussion of what we envision our church to be and how we will financially resource it together. As we remind ourselves each week, our wealth is what we share. It is our collective contributions that make our congregation's work possible. Following the service, we will get soup and bread and then come back into the sanctuary. Lastly, I want to remind you that on February 14th at 6 p.m., we will gather together here at the church to build community with migrant communities here in our neighborhood. This potluck gathering will be an opportunity to strengthen relationships and figure out what ours is to do when it comes to migrant solidarity. All are welcome to participate. Please find Chris Jarrett during coffee hour today if you have any questions. He'll be in the Palmer room. I think there's a little table set up. And now I welcome John Broom to lead us in our call to worship.
Thank you. Good morning, friends. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a community of children, youth, and adults, a people of many beliefs and traditions, bound not by the specific things we believe, but the values that we share. Now, whether you're joining us for the first time or for the 1000th time, you are welcome here. Whether you believe in God some of the time, all of the time, or none of the time, you are welcome here. Whatever your race, whomever you love, Whichever way you move in the world, however much money is or isn't in your pocket, you are welcome here. I invite you, when you feel ready, to take a breath in and out. And as the music begins, let us enter into our service together.
In just a moment, Asher here in the sanctuary and Harris at the Admiral will light our chalices, the symbol of our faith. We light our chalices this morning with these words. Each person here today is enough, just as they are. But as Anne Lamott beautifully reminds us, grace meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. May this flame invite us to feel the wholeness of where we are and the possibility of where we might yet go.
I have asked our family choir to stay up here to help lead us in our opening hymn. Our opening hymn this morning is number 1023, Building Bridges, in our teal hymnal. We're going to sing this as a two-part round, so we will start by singing this in unison and then split into our round. Starting with Group 1, choir Group 1, raise your hand. Group 2, raise your hand. If you can see Group 1, you should sing with Group 1. If you can see Group 2, you should sing with Group 2. If you're in the middle, you can take your pick. So we will start in unison.
There
Friends, would you join me in standing as you are able and so moved to recite the words of our covenant? They're in your order of service and are on the screen. We covenant to build a community that challenges us to grow and empowers us to honor the truth within ourselves. We will be generous with our gifts and honest in our communication, holding faithful to a love that embraces both diversity and conflict. Called by our living tradition, we will nurture spirituality within a vision of the eternal, living out our inner convictions through struggles for justice and acts of compassion.
I now invite you to join us in our singing our congregational hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
So live. I want to offer my deep gratitude to Reverend Jason Leiden, who's normally the one who's in this space, for doing what we call a pulpit swap this morning. So I serve our congregation in Appleton, Wisconsin as the assistant minister, and Jason has schlepped all the way up there and is leading services there this morning, and I have schlepped all the way down here and get to be with you all. So I'm really grateful for your warm welcome. Thank you. Yay. And I want to tell you a story this morning about Tiny the God, and I learned this story from my friend and colleague, Becky Brooks. So this is the story of Tiny the God. Tiny the God was a very tiny god, and as you can imagine, right, if you were a tiny god, and there were all those other big gods, yeah, you can sit up front. I normally am like, stories are for everybody, but if you need to, if you're like, you need to be up front and sitting crisscross applesauce to listen, then you should do that. The steps are perfect for that. So Tiny the God was tiny. And the thing about the other gods is that the other gods were not tiny. They were really big. And so sometimes Tiny the God, have you ever felt a feeling called jealous? Yes, okay, good. Then we're all on the same page about how Tiny the God felt about feeling tiny when all of the other gods were so big. And so the way that Tiny the God, yeah, Asher, what's your question?
Was Tiny like this big?
Yes, extremely tiny, minuscule the god almost. And so Tiny felt jealous of all the other big gods. And so Tiny thought to herself, okay, the way I can handle being tiny is if I make my mark on the world. They will build tiny statues of me, Tiny the God. So Tiny said to herself, okay, so the way I can make a mark is if I have a thing that's mine. And so Tiny thought and thought. She was like, I gotta come up with a good thing. And she thought and she realized that her thing was gonna be, you are not alone. Tiny was pretty pleased with herself. She thought that seemed like a pretty good idea. And so Tiny went around on the evening breeze each day, whispering into the ears of anybody she could find, you are not alone. Everywhere she went, every ear that the breeze touched, you are not alone. Oh, and people were so comforted by this idea. Tiny was very proud of herself. She was already picturing the unveiling of her statue in the Hall of the Gods. She was ready. And one night, she was out on the evening breeze, and she was just whispering, "You are not alone." And then something strange happened. This person was named Miriam. Miriam heard Tiny the god say, "You are not alone." And instead of feeling comforted and at peace, Miriam was agitated. She just kept turning that phrase over and over in her mind, "You are not alone." She would hear it when she opened the fridge, when she went to bed, when she was taking a shower. "You are not alone." Miriam, not being comforted, made Tiny begin to roll back some of her plans about the unveiling of her statue and wonder if this thing she had gotten was quite as good as she thought it was. "I better watch and see what happens," thought Tiny. And so Tiny watched Miriam say it over and over again, "You are not alone," and get more and more sort of worked up about it. And then Miriam said, "I am not alone. I am connected to all the people around me." And so when she read a story in the newspaper about people who didn't have enough to eat, Miriam thought, "I am not alone. I'm connected. I have to do something about it." And so she brought some food to her local food pantry. And then she heard a story on the radio about a law that would impact people she loved, and she thought, "I am not alone." And so she picked up her phone and called her senators. "I am not alone." And then one day, and Tiny was watching this all unfold very thoughtfully, because when you're a god, you think you've got control over things, and then you say things, and then people just run with it. People. And so Tiny watched Miriam one day when her phone rang. And Miriam picked up the phone, and it was a friend of hers on the phone who was having a really hard time. And Miriam picked up the phone and was talking to her friend, and Tiny heard Miriam say, "You are not alone. I am here." Aha, thought Tiny. This is the thing that will make me famous. This is what it means to be together, thought Tiny. This is what the people need to hear. And so Tiny went out on the breeze and whispered to everyone she could find, "You are not alone. I am here." In fact, Tiny spent so much time whispering on the breeze, "You are not alone. I am here," that eventually Tiny became the breeze itself. And that's why you won't really find a statue of Tiny or a picture of Tiny in a museum or any shrines to Tiny. Because Tiny is there. Every time we help someone in need, every time we act to care for our neighbors, you hear Tiny, and she whispers, "You are not alone. I am here."
Please join me in singing our children up to the top.
Each year, we all make a commitment, a pledge, to support the ministry of our church. Now, in addition to this contribution, each Sunday, we take a collection so that we can share with those doing justice beyond our walls. To make your contribution, you can go to our website, or you can take your camera, get that QRL code in the order of service, or if you want to put a check or a little cash in, we have a box on the wall outside in the Palmer Room. For the months of January and February, we're sharing our plate with Liberation Library, and today, Sophie Lipman, a member of the Liberation Library Steering Committee, will share some information about the organization. Sophie, this one's for you.
Hello, me. Hope you can hear me all right. My name is Sophie. I use any pronouns. Sorry, there's a bit of, but I think it's okay. So I'm with the Liberation Library. I'm on the steering committee. We are a Chicago-based, volunteer-run prison abolitionist organization who sends books and magazines to young people who are incarcerated in Illinois across the state. And really our overall vision and is to create a future without prisons and jails. And until then, we try to work directly with impacted young people to support them in developing their imagination, leadership skills, self-determination, and connections with each other and to outside worlds of their choosing. So we've been around for 9 years, which is really hard to believe. We run a book program, so we're sending books inside, books that the young people request, and they're always theirs to keep. And then our new program is a magazine program where we work with young people inside to self-publish a magazine that allows them to share their stories and artwork and access content that they want to see. So everything from sports, fashion, to wellness exercises, updates on the Pretrial Fairness Act, which might impact them, or how to open a bank account when they get out. And so really, ultimately, we see our work as resourcing young people inside as we think they're best positioned to make demands on the systems that cage and police them. So that's it, really. Your support is so appreciated. So thank you so much for sharing whatever you're able to contribute. All the funding goes to paying directly impacted people. So we're all volunteer, but we do feel a commitment to paying young people who are inside and or post-incarceration. So thank you so much. And I'll drop some things in the chat, but hopefully you have the links too in terms of coming to our packing days, the second and fourth Sunday, and we're having a little birthday party later this month. So thank you so much.
Now I invite you to join me in reading our offertory words. They're printed in your order of service and are on the screen. This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm it and enable its participation in the larger world around us. Our offering will now be generously given and gratefully received.
I invite you now into the spirit of prayer or meditation, whatever word works for you. Let's start by taking a breath together, feeling ourselves ground into the earth. We begin in thanks, in gratitude. Thankful for the breath in our lungs, the beauty of our earth, and the strength of this community. We hold in our hearts those who care for family in ill health, those who live with grief or chronic pain, those struggling with addiction or illness seen and unseen. You are not alone. We are here. For parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, you are not alone. We are here. We pray for our neighbors in prison, for those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty, for migrants who are fleeing and seeking, finding new homes in our city among many. You are not alone. We are here. We pray for all those living in harm's way. We pray for our planet and commit to work that will lead us away from the harms of climate change. We pray that wisdom, compassion, and empathy guide the leaders of our world. May they and we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. Into this shared silence, I invite you now to speak the name of anyone you wish to lift up into the loving support of this gathered community. With our deepest compassion, we hold in our hearts those named and unnamed, those remembered and those forgotten. Let it be so. Blessed be. Amen. During our ritual of lighting candles for our joys and concerns, we want to continue to take care of one another. Here in the 2U sanctuary, you're invited to come forward and light a candle on either side. As you end your time of contemplation and candlelighting, we invite you to use the hand sanitizer. For those at the Admiral, I invite you to come forward and take a pebble from one bowl, hold it tightly, putting your energy into the stone and then knowing your joys and sorrows to be shared by this community, let it go lightly into the other bowl. For those of us on Zoom, join us by sharing our joys and concerns in the chat window, and I will light a candle to represent all of our collective celebrations and sorrows. We hold all of these joys, celebrations, sorrows, and struggles close to our hearts. John, would you share our first reading?
Our first reading this morning is the poem Grace by Joy Harrow. I think of wind and her wild ways the year we had nothing to lose and lost it anyway in the cursed country of the fox. We still talk about that winter, how the cold froze imaginary buffalo on the stuffed horizon of snowbanks. The haunting voices of the starved and mutilated broke fences crashed our thermostat dreams, and we couldn't stand it one more time. So once again, we lost a winter in stubborn memory, walked through cheap apartment walls, skated through fields of ghosts in a town that never wanted us, in the epic search for grace. Like coyote, like rabbit, we could not contain our terror and clowned our way through a season of false midnights. We had to swallow that town with laughter so it would go down as easy as honey. And one morning, as the sun struggled to break ice and our dreams had found us with coffee and pancakes in a truck stop along Highway 80, we found Grace. I could say Grace was a woman with time on her hands, or a white buffalo escaped from memory. But in that dingy light, it was a promise of balance. We once again understood the talk of the animals, and spring was lean and hungry with the hope of children and corn. I would like to say, with Grace, we picked ourselves up and walked into the spring thaw. We didn't. The next season was worse. You went home to Leech Lake to work with the tribe, and I went south. And wind, I am still crazy. I know there is something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it.
Our second reading this morning is from the devotional book called Honest Advent by artist Scott Erickson. And it's written from a Christian perspective, but this passage speaks to a deeper experience in which I think we can find meaning and learning. He writes, "Grace is theologically defined as the, quote, freely given, unmerited favor and love of God, close quote, which as a definition is beyond fantastic. As a daily tangible experience, I have some questions. Does divine love mean I should expect an invisible hug at some point today? Does divine favor mean things will mostly go my way? I mean, not so much my way that I become a spiritual Veruca Salt, but maybe enough that my #blessed posts on social media are evidence of God's goodness in my life? I don't know what your questions are, but abstract religious talk about unconditional love can leave me a little confused about what kind of affections I can expect from this invisible deity. What I've come to understand is that grace is the antidote to the ailment of shame. Shame believes that one lacks what it takes to be loved and must endeavor somehow to earn it back. It's the burden of perfection, morally, spiritually, humanly, and it inevitably destroys our souls because there is no fulfillment of enough. It's just an endless jog on the janky treadmill of striving. But grace is presence, not withheld.
I invite you now to rise in body and spirit as we sing another hymn. We will be singing hymn number 298, which is a misprint in the order of service. It's 298. Wake Now My Senses. So please rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing verses 1, 2, and 3 of Wake Now My Senses. Wake now my senses and hear the earth's call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, and hear the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. You may be seated.
A month or two ago, I was doing something like cleaning out our fridge, I think. Something where my head was sort of stuck inside of something else, I'm sure, rearranging all of the various expired mustards that we have. Some of you also are people with expired mustards. I'm so glad. So glad you are not alone. I'm here. And while I was doing that, my wife was sitting at the kitchen table talking about her to-do list, trying to figure out if she was going to be able to accomplish all of the things on it. And I think I muttered to the expired mustard, "You know, task completion is morally neutral." And then silently she regretted marrying a minister. And we went on with our days and our lives, and lo and behold, a few days or weeks later, I can't quite remember, but I think we were in the car, and I was spinning out about work, describing this deep sense that I would not be able to accomplish all of the things that I was supposed to accomplish in a given week. I'm glad that some of us have just met each other today, but you already know. You already know what has happened to me. Which is that, of course, while I was worrying and spinning my wheels and talking about how it just felt terrible, I was in this deep malaise because I just wasn't going to be able to do it. I just wasn't going to be able to do all of the things that people were expecting me to do. And of course, my wife turned to me and said something like, "You know, Hannah, task completion is morally neutral." Be careful what you say. Be careful what platitudes you put out into the universe, because they will come back to you when you least expect it and, frankly, least desire them. And that is one of those platitudes, those truths, that checking something off your to-do list is Morally neutral, meaning it does not make you a good person if you do it, and if you don't do it, it doesn't make you a bad person, is one of those things that I think many of us intellectually know, right? If you asked us, does it make you a good person to check something off your to-do list? We would all say, no. But then, in the heat of the moment, when we have failed to check something off of our to-do list, do we feel like it makes us a bad person? Yes. Yes, that is that creeping voice of shame that Scott Erickson talks about in his reading. It's that creeping voice that tells you that that you are not enough, that there's something about you that requires that you, I love that image, an endless jog on the janky treadmill of striving. And it feels that way sometimes. Trying to live in our world feels like you are on the janky treadmill, endlessly jogging and striving, yes. And it's never like a nice treadmill. It's always one that you feel like, why hasn't the YMCA gotten rid of this treadmill? Why is this still here? And in theory, our congregations, our spiritual communities are places where we go to unlearn that lesson that we hear from so many other places, some of them other religious communities, that we're not enough and that we need to keep striving and keep doing more, being more, because we're not enough. And in theory, these communities are places where we come to unlearn that truth. And yet, the tricky thing about us human beings is that even when we say we have come here to unlearn that truth, we sometimes replicate it here in our spiritual home among one another. We do the same thing, where we suggest that what someone is doing is not enough, that you haven't done enough. How many of you have felt a deep shame because you have failed to do something you told like a committee chair that you were going to do? And even if this is your first time in this religious community, let this not scare you away, but invite you to know that this is a place where we are honest about where we are on our journey of learning. We build a hierarchy of tasks of what really matters. We act as if there are some things that make you specialer if you do them in a spiritual community. We make little janky treadmills everywhere we go. Not because we, in theory, buy into the idea that we are not enough, but because that lesson is so deeply ingrained that not even those of us who went off and got theology degrees have been able to unlearn that lesson. Not even the most enlightened seeming among us have fully unlearned that lesson. That you don't have to jog on the treadmill in order to be a valuable part of the community. And the word grace here, in that context, is an invitation to what Scott Erickson in the reading called presence not withheld. Presence not withheld. Meaning the ability to just be present, to just be with someone, to say, you are not alone. I am here. In fact, recently, I was at a meeting at the congregation. I serve in Appleton, and we were doing doing the check-in part of the meeting, which is a a key sacrament for Unitarian Universalists, that before, right, it's true, that before we can get to the business of the day, we have to tell each other how we are doing. We have to talk about what's on our heart, what's getting in the way, what we're carrying with us into this space and this moment, because we know that we are more than the janky treadmill of striving. And so that is one practice that helps us do that. And I found myself about 2/3 of the way through my check-in, I realized that I was reciting what I call the litany of busyness. Have any of you ever recited the litany of busyness as a check-in? And I paused, and I thought, oh my gosh, if I'm reciting the litany of busyness, I need to slow down. And I turned to the people in the meeting who I'm sure several of them had unanswered emails from me. And I looked at them and said, you know, all of that is true. All of that busyness is true. And in theory, my job is to be present with you all. That's the most important piece. That's the most important thing that you ask of me, is not, in fact, to return your emails, but instead to be present with you. To show you what it might be, and this I did not get this fancy. I was like, it's just my job to be present with you, and that's really hard. And I would say now to you, with the benefit of hindsight, that part of the calling of ministry is to offer presence not withheld. To let people be experienced, seen, heard, and loved in their fullness, just as they are. But also, that's really hard. And as I have considered what grace means to us as Unitarian Universalists, a people who, right, collectively in this room believe simultaneously in God and not God, some of the time, none of the time, all of the time. Some of us hold all of those positions simultaneously. And you can't know which one we hold until you ask us in that moment. If I were a better physicist, I would have a joke, a more specific joke there, but the physicists in the room should make it to themselves in their own heads. It's so hard because our neighbors who are in theologically non-pluralistic traditions get to sort of offer a platitude in that moment that says something like God's grace is for everyone, or, you know, God will offer you grace. And that's really convenient because it lets the rest of us off the hook, doesn't it? That it's God's job to offer you grace, and so I can just keep ignoring you or being kind of a jerk to you. So what makes it so hard to offer that presence to one another? Because just because we don't all believe that God is there offering us grace doesn't mean that we can live without it. Right? Doesn't mean that we can live without that experience of being loved and seen and heard in our fullness. And in that space of trying to figure out how it is that in our space of diverse belief, we can experience grace, I think about what the Quaker teacher and writer Parker Palmer calls the tragic gap. And the tragic gap is, to state it much more simply than Parker Palmer probably would, the tragic gap is the gap between the world as we know it could be and the world as we know it is. It's the gap between the world that could be and the world that is. And the world that could be is not something we've only imagined. That world that could be, it feels so tragic because we have actually seen it and experienced it. So I invite you to call up in your mind's eye, in your very own imaginarium, a moment in your life where you experienced that feeling of presence not withheld. That experience of feeling known, loved, seen, in your fullness, just as you are. That experience, you know what that feels like. Most of us have had it at least once in our lives. And so when we encounter community where we don't feel like that, it feels tragic not because we know we can never achieve it, but because we know we can achieve it, and most of the time we choose not to. Right? Like, bummer. That we know we could, and most of the time we choose not to. We choose the well-worn path of the janky treadmill. Not just for ourselves, but we expect others to run on the janky treadmill. There is a world where we could experience that grace, not scarcely, not once in a while, but all the time. Maybe not every moment of every day. Let's start with a reachable goal. But even sometimes, that world is possible. In the last portion of the poem Grace, Joy Harjo, who was a U.S. Poet Laureate and is a member of the Muskogee Creek tribe, I think about that last line. I know there is something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it. I know that there is something more all-encompassing, something more possible than just our trauma memories. We have seen it. Not I have seen it. We have seen it. It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder what it would take for us as a community, for you all here at Second Unitarian, for us collectively as Unitarian Universalists, for any assemblage of our people, wherever we gather and however we gather. What would it take to actually get off the janky treadmill? And I think that it's some of the things that it would take to get off of a literal treadmill. Right? The first thing that you have to do when you are anybody who has ever been on a treadmill that's going too fast, that terrifying feeling that grips your heart where you feel like, oh no, I've lost control. The treadmill is in charge now. That the first thing you have to do is slow down. You have to slow down. You have to let that sense of urgency slip a little. Not the sense of urgency that's helpful, right? That there is that piece of urgency that helps us feel acutely the suffering of others, that piece of urgency that inspires us to do prophetic things, but there's also that piece of urgency that is the treadmill, going for its own sake. Or as I sometimes like to say, there are things in ministry and in spiritual communities that are life and death, really. And that very, very few of them appear in an email. So, what can we do to slow down? Not stop immediately, because anybody who has stopped a really fast treadmill immediately knows that is also a deeply unpleasant experience, and it is not recommended by the manufacturers of the janky treadmill. But what would it take to slow it down? To just ease a little bit. And sometimes, right, not just offer that ease to ourselves, though that we must, but to offer that ease to others. And this is not to say that we should excuse behavior. No. That breaks covenant, but instead that we could ease up on the gas a little bit. What would it take to slow down? What's hard is that it's such a well-worn path in our minds to get on the treadmill, to keep going. How many of us, right when we think we've gotten off the janky treadmill of striving to be enough, right when we think we're like, I have done it, we're right back on the treadmill. And so in our communities, the responsibility of offering grace, of offering presence, of doing the work that might help one another get off the treadmill is not an external, right? It's not the hand of the divine coming in to press the slow down button on the treadmill. It's not the hand of the divine, right? The invisible divine hug that Scott Erickson talked about in his reading. It's not things going your way. No one's manifesting anything. But it is an invitation to feel that gap, that tragic gap between the world as we experience it most of the time, which is the striving, and the world as we know it can be, that presence not withheld, but that we have a responsibility to offer it to one another. And that will be messy. Some of us are going to fall off the treadmill. Some of us will need each other to pick ourselves back up. It will not feel good all the time. It will perhaps not even feel good most of the time, which feels like a non-advertisement. Come to church, where it will not feel great sometimes. I feel like I'm composing the apology text to Jason already in my head of like, sorry. Because it doesn't. Really getting off the treadmill, because it challenges so many of the stories we hold dear about what makes us valuable. It challenges so many of the stories that we have been writing and others have been writing for us since we were children about what makes us important, about what makes us valuable. And so this, the poetry, the music, this day is an invitation. I will not say an exhortation or some sort of instruction, because I know better than to believe that groups of Unitarian Universalists do what someone tells them to do. I'm not delusional. And so I simply extend an invitation to notice in yourself, in your life, in your work here in this community? Where is there a window for you to slow down the speed of the treadmill and be present, knowing that there is perhaps not some unseen hand coming to comfort your neighbor, but that you might do that with your presence, not withheld. You are not alone. We are here. What might be possible if we take that invitation? May it be so. Amen.
Please rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing our closing hymn, Building a New Way, number 1017. The words will be on your screen and in the teal hymnal. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. Our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need, for with love that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Oh, peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, the world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
Reach out your hands into the space to feel what might be possible. To feel the truth that you are not alone, that you are enough, and yet that grace does not leave us where it found us. We could all use a slowing down, a few moments of ease, not just for ourselves, but for one another. May your week be filled with ease, with presence, not withheld. Go in peace, knowing this community waits to embrace you upon your return.